Begin, I would like to take a moment to remember the members of our congressional family we lost last week. Representative Jackie Wolosky, Zach Potts, and Emma Thompson. Our thoughts are with their families as we all continue to mourn. To accommodate members who are traveling from her memorial service this morning, we delayed the roundtable for 45 minutes so members would have an opportunity to join. Welcome today to today's roundtable on election misinformation. Nearly a year ago, this committee held a hearing on the fraudulent election audit in Maricopa County, Arizona. This so-called audit was inspired by lies about election fraud spread by former President Trump and his allies. During the hearing, Maricopa County Supervisor Bill Gates testified that this effort to undermine the integrity of our elections was, and I quote, "the biggest threat to our democracy in my lifetime," end quote. Supervisor Gates is a Republican, as are members of our panel today, but he spoke out against this campaign of threats and lies because protecting our democracy is more important than partisan politics. Today, the committee released a report detailing new findings from our investigation into the effects of election misinformation and disinformation. We asked local election officials in 4 states, Arizona, Florida, Ohio, and Texas, how election lies are impacting their ability to do their jobs. What we heard is chilling. Election officials are under siege. They face growing campaigns of harassment and threats, all driven by false accusations of fraud. For example, we learned that after the 2020 election, conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, Roger Stone, and Mike Lindell singled out one Florida election administrator. They publicized his office phone number and encouraged listeners to call with the message that, quote, "they are watching him," end quote, and that, quote, "he is a piece of crap," end quote. He reported receiving countless threatening calls. In Texas, the spread of conspiracy theories in national media outlets drove truly despicable threats. On social media, people threatened to kill one election administrator and, quote, "let his lifeless body hang in public until maggots drip out of his mouth," end quote. Other messages included chilling threats against election administrators' children, including one stating, and I quote, "I think we should end your bloodline," end quote. The people who run elections in some states are also being subjected to outrageous new civil and criminal penalties for simply doing their jobs. Republican state legislatures in each state we investigated have proposed or enacted laws that make it far more difficult to administer elections. Local election officials told the committee that they tried to push back against these laws because they did not improve election security, would increase costs, and were inspired by false claims. But Republican legislatures enacted them anyway. These pressures have been so great that experienced election professionals are quitting their jobs. Let's be clear. The election lies pushed by former President Trump and his allies have inspired truly dangerous efforts to subvert elections. These schemes are not about fairness, election security, or the truth. They make it harder for Americans to cast their ballots, but easier for dishonest officials to overturn the results of elections they don't like. Today's report details a set of actions that Congress and the administration can take to begin addressing this problem. These include establishing a coordinated federal approach to protecting our elections. It also includes ensuring states and local governments have the resources they need to administer elections, while also providing accurate information to Americans and protecting election workers. We also must establish meaningful penalties for anyone who threatens or intimidates election officials. The time to act to protect our elections is now. I hope all my colleagues on both sides of the aisle would join me in this effort. I now want to recognize Mr. Sessions for an opening statement. Recognized.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much. And to our witnesses who are here today, thank you very much. The issue that is before us today is a very interesting one because you see where there are questions asked, especially of elections officials, there are no answers. There is silence. Oh, they defend themselves. Yes, ma'am, they do. But even the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who has been given many of these, what I would call abnormalities, inconsistencies, and irregularities, has yet to even acknowledge the receipt of those. They do not even begin to look at the information that was presented vastly to the American people, 2,000 mules. And when I have provided to the Federal Bureau of Investigation 3 years ago and 1 year ago, detailed information that we assumed that we were asking questions about and expected to hear something back, we did not call it vote fraud. We called it abnormalities, inconsistencies, and irregularities. And yet the Federal Bureau of Investigation even refuses to acknowledge receipt of this information. Madam Chairman, I do appreciate you holding this hearing today. I do appreciate you having witnesses who come today as experts. I've seen their titles and their organizations. They consider themselves experts. Madam Chairman, I will today provide the same information that I have provided to other law enforcement agencies, other elections officials who have yet to even write back, call back, or even make a public statement. And I would like to challenge these officials, these witnesses who are here before us today. I will give them the same information that I have given to law enforcement. And I truly would respect and appreciate, since they are expert in being called on today, since they're professionals in these areas, to look at directly the information that we're requesting. One of the primary points that we would make is some 57,000 votes that were made in Dallas County, votes that subsequently disappeared from the voter rolls, only to appear weeks later. I did not call this fraud. I called this inconsistencies, abnormalities, and irregularities. But you see, Madam Chairman, there has been no explanation. And so when there are questions, I believe that officials who are responsible, who are professional, as you and I believe, have an obligation to respond back to credible, professional people. So each one of you who are today as witnesses, within just a few minutes, will be receiving from me an official letter in my duties, not only in government form, but on this subcommittee, asking you to please take time and to dig in and use your professionalism. We have professionals on our side, and we'd be very pleased to work with you. But we have been incapable to hear back from elections officials and federal law enforcement on this issue. Madam Chairman, thank you for the time, and I yield back and look forward to the hearing from these witnesses who will provide us vital information about our country.
Thank you. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by an incredible panel of election administrators and experts. We will hear from Lisa Marra, Director of Elections for Cochise County in Arizona, and the presidents of the elections officials of Arizona. We're also honored to have Tina Barton, Senior Election Expert from the Elections Group and a former Senior Program Advisor to the Election Assistance Commission. We also welcome Nora Benavidez, the Senior Counsel and Director of Digital Justice and Civil Rights at the advocacy organization Free Press. And finally, it's my pleasure to recognize my colleague, Mr. Welsh, to introduce our final panelists. Mr. Welsh. Mr. Welsh to make the introduction. What? I want to just welcome Jim Condos, Vermont Secretary of State. And I want to thank our remarkable panel for being here and for all the important work you do to protect our democracy. Now we'll give each of our panelists 3 minutes for brief remarks. Secretary Condos, let us start with you. Secretary Condos, please.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, Chairwoman Maloney, Ranking Member Comer. It is my honor to be here before you and speak to the rest of the committee. For the record, I am Jim Condos, Vermont's 38th Secretary of State and Chief Election Official. I'm a second-generation American, and I'm very proud of my Greek heritage. Since taking office, my top priority has been accessibility, security, accuracy, and the integrity of Vermont's elections. I am proud that Vermont is widely considered one of the most voter-friendly states in the country. I am equally proud of the high marks Vermont has received from MIT's Election Performance Index, better known as the EPI, a highly reputable data-driven analysis of state election administration. Vermont has scored first in the nation on the EPI in both the 2016 and 2020 presidential elections. In Vermont, we utilize the gold standard of election integrity, a voter-marked paper ballot. Since the 2006 time period, we have completed post-general election audits that have provided assurances that our elections have integrity. These facts did not stop a man named Harry Ansbach from calling our office and leaving numerous threatening voicemails from my election team following the 2020 election. Those voicemails, colored with lewd and profane language, repeatedly told my staff that, one, our time was up. We would be hanged or executed by firing squad. Our days were numbered. We would, and I quote, get effing popped, and to put a gun in our mouth and pull the trigger. These threats and others were coupled with the same conspiracy theories about the integrity of our elections that our former president and his supporters continue to push to this very day. Lies so insidious they are driving people to make violent threats against sworn election officials just for doing their jobs. The voicemails were so concerning that one of my staff members suffered symptoms of PTSD, and he had to receive extensive counseling while taking a leave of absence. We have had to forego budget issues to install new security features at our office building, and we worked with our legislature and law enforcement to strengthen Vermont's ability to investigate and prosecute threats like these. Unfortunately, this story is not unique to Vermont. This experience is shared by my colleagues around the country, some of whom have added 24/7 security. As states, we can only do so much to respond. We need Congress's help to ensure we have the support, the tools necessary to keep our committed election workers safe, and we need to have dedicated financial resources available to be able to administer their secure, transparent, and fair elections. I always end by saying no election official should have to fear for their lives while focused on their duties in service to our democracy. Our democratic process cannot survive undefended attacks on the people we rely to vote. Thank you.
Thank you for your very moving testimony. Ms. Marra, you are now recognized.
Good afternoon from Arizona, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in the roundtable today. I'm honored to be here and honored to serve as an election official in Arizona. I look forward to continuing and creating new partnerships across the country to work together to continue to build upon trust in our election system and to educate voters so they're reassured that their one vote really does matter. The 15 counties in our great state vary greatly, but what is consistent, whether we have 2,000 voters or 2 million voters, is our dedication in every county to continue to conduct accurate, safe, and secure elections. Our voters are angry and confused. They simply don't know what to believe. What is clearly apparent once we can have a conversation and move past that anger is just frustration. People who have voted for years and were never concerned with simple things like candidate rotation on the ballot now think everything's a conspiracy. These conversations sadden me the most because we've fractured the spirit of many who think voting doesn't even matter anymore. They aren't sure who they can turn to for advice and answers, and we've got to repair this damage now. I'm really hopeful that we can. We need to continue to speak up and correct these deliberate or misinformational statements when we hear them. As the many angry calls and threats continue across the country, we get more calls and emails from people thanking us for our service. And those are far more in our county. The problem is people say they see these statements and they see these claims against us and they want to speak up and say it's not true, but they don't because they're afraid of being attacked. Understandable. It's why many election officials can't speak up. They're fearful of becoming attacked or they're fearful of losing their jobs. It's easy to attack the small minority who keep speaking up to defend elections. It's important in America. If everybody spoke up to defend what they know is true, it'd be a much bigger target. We'd still be attacked most likely, but there's safety in numbers, and it's pretty hard to attack millions of us that speak the truth. Election officials and poll workers are your neighbors, your friends, possibly even your family. Support and defend them. If experienced election officials across this country continue to quit or run out of their jobs because of this ridiculous harassment, who's going to take their place? The answer? It's inexperienced people, and that's not going to help us move the needle to increase voter confidence in America. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Barton, you are now recognized.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Maloney, Ranking Member Comer, and members of the committee. Thank you for convening this roundtable. I recently concluded a 32-year career in public service where I served at the local, county, and federal levels. The last 16 plus years of my career were focused on election administration. On election night, November 2020, my team made an error when saving an absentee file that contained results for 7 of our 32 precincts. The error was found and quickly corrected. That following Friday, a press conference was held by a national Republican political figure at the Oakland County Republican Party headquarters, the county party that had nominated me as their candidate for Oakland County Clerk Register of Deeds. President Trump and I both lost in our county, but that press conference changed my life forever. No one contacted me to ask what had happened or to seek the truth. Instead, this statement was made. Just last night in Oakland County, we found 2,000 ballots that had been given to Democrats that were Republican ballots due to clerical error, and this took place in Rochester Hills. You could hear the gasps of everyone in the room, and I was stunned. I responded with the following statement shared by video. My name is Tina Barton. As a clerk, my job is to run the elections fairly and securely. All ballots are and have been accounted for. There were no missing ballots. The accusation that 2,000 were found is categorically false. As a Republican, I am disturbed that this is intentionally being mischaracterized to undermine the election process. This was an isolated mistake that was quickly rectified once realized. Every voter should have complete confidence in our voting system. Every vote that was cast was counted accurately, and there is a paper ballot backup. And I stood by our reported result. 4 days after that press conference, I received my first death threat. It was laced with obscenities, threats to my life and my family members' lives, and used sexually charged language. Pardon me. While the details of my story are unique, over 1,000 incidents of hostile and harassing contact have been reported to the DOJ. Mis and dis and malinformation is dangerous, and it's fueling these threats. We need your help. We need your help with protection. We need your help with increased awareness of the threats and intimidation. We need grant funding that is specifically designated to assist officials. If elections are truly critical infrastructure, we must protect them and those that administer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And next is Ms. Benavidez. You are now recognized.
Chairwoman Maloney, Representative Sessions, esteemed members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to appear before you and for seeking Free Press Action's views on how to defend against election mis and disinformation. This subject is of paramount importance for this committee and for the future of our democracy. These concepts are not new. Throughout history, lies and propaganda have been used to subvert people's faith in institutions and each other, and to otherwise obfuscate truth. Yet these threats are even more potent in the digital age. Pew has found that most Americans use social media now as their information gateway. Social media companies like Meta and Google know that people are vulnerable to incendiary and deceitful content and have built profitable business models around amplifying and getting more eyeballs on mis and disinformation. Layered on top of this business incentive are the information gaps left where quality local journalism has withered. In the absence of robust news coming to people through other channels, online users are consuming content largely in their own social media echo chambers, predicated on platforms' abusive data practices, in which they target users based on our behaviors and preferences. In 2020, for example, voters were targeted with content online that discouraged them from voting, with surgically precise efforts to dissuade Black, Indigenous, and Latino voters from turning out to the polls. The goal of such disinformation campaigns is clear: to disenfranchise voters and to build distrust in our institutions and each other. The impact of recent disinformation efforts has far outlasted the last several election cycles. For example, policymakers in 18 states have used lies about the 2020 election being stolen or corrupt to legitimize introduction of new laws. These constitutionally troublesome laws narrow voter access and make the electoral process harder. Disinformation is thus not only a vehicle for social division, but is used to advance structural limits on American freedom and basic rights. With the tail of harm so long and entrenched in our society, we must move towards cross-partisan discussions about how to blunt the spread of disinformation by increasing defensive tactics at the individual, local, and systemic levels. We must rein in abusive practices by social media companies. Their business models threaten to destabilize our democracy by amplifying lies and calls for violence, reaching audiences with a speed, precision, and scale once unimaginable. Finally, as we develop defenses to malign campaigns that manipulate communities, we must develop proactive measures that rebuild healthy information pathways and strong local news to better empower communities rather than discourage civic engagement. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to further discussion with the committee.
I want to thank all of you for being here and for your remarkable testimony. We'll now move into questions with 3 minutes allotted per member. I now recognize members in order of seniority, alternating between Democratic and Republican members. Once all of the members present have had the opportunity to ask questions, we'll see if time allows for additional questions. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, is now recognized. Mr. Raskin.
Madam Chair, thank you very much for calling this urgently important hearing. Ms. Marra, I'd like to come to you. I was very moved by your testimony this afternoon, and I'd like to ask you what kind of threats you have received. Did they come in the mail? Did they come in the phone? And what do you think is the source of these threats?
Madam Chairwoman, Representative, thank you for the question. I have been fortunate in our county. Cochise County is located in the very corner of Arizona and New Mexico. We border the country of Mexico. I have great support from our law enforcement, from our board of supervisors, so I've been way more fortunate than most people. I think a big part of the problem is what defines a threat. It's obvious that if someone calls and they are going to threaten to kill you or murder you or stab you or hang you, but many of the things we get are threats, but where do we draw the line? I will say we get a lot of phone calls. People leave voicemails all hours of the day and night, and they come from, they're not even people in Arizona. And a lot of it is spurred by social media. Some people that put out our contact information that say, call these people and leave messages and tell them these things are wrong. So that's a big part of it. We do get some emails, but a lot of them are just voicemails, and they're, we know you're corrupt. We know you've committed crimes. You need to resign. Recently, I've had people write letters to our Board of Supervisors demanding I be fired for no reason. I've been at the county for over 10 years. So those are really the things I face here. We've had more problems in our larger counties in Arizona.
But I wonder what advice you can give us about how to protect election registrars, secretaries of state, the kinds of people who have been suffering from the onslaught of threats, many of them violent, many of them in the middle of the night, many accompanied by people appearing at their homes. What do we need to do to protect people? Because we can't have a democracy without elections, and we can't have elections if the election officials are terrified by people who've been driven to doing extreme things by disinformation. And, I am so upset about what Donald Trump has said about the 2020 elections, where more than 60 federal and state judges, including 8 he appointed to the bench himself, have rejected every claim of electoral fraud and corruption. And yet he continues to spread the big lie and spread this paranoia in the country. So I'm just wondering if you could give us some thoughts about what needs to be done to protect election workers and election officials so we don't lose the experience and the stability that you provide.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative, thank you for that question. I believe we should have some defined laws. We should have some penalties. We should have some things with teeth, uniform standards for reporting these threats of violence and acts against election officials and poll workers. Criminal penalties for people who knowingly or willingly attempt to subvert the system by damaging equipment, property, the threats. Again, we're fortunate in Arizona. We have great partnerships, Homeland Security, with Department of Public Safety. Our local sheriff here has been wonderful for security. I think we need to document these things. I don't think we should take them lightly. And just because they're angry phone calls, I think we need to make sure that those do get escalated up to someone in law enforcement, just so that we can keep track of them. It concerns me, the longer we go on, the angrier people are getting. And at some point, there's a tipping point, and that concerns me for all of us.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And Madam Chair, I'll just say, I want to thank you for calling this hearing. There's no democracy without elections, and there's no elections without election workers and registrars and the people who register voters and make the elections work. And we've got to do everything we can to protect them. And I hope we can have widespread bipartisan unanimity about that the election workers and officials must be protected. I'll yield back to you.
Thank you for your leadership. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, is recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Sessions.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you very much. And to each of you, the gentlewoman from Cochise County, from Free Action Press, the gentleman from Vermont, and also the gentlewoman from Michigan, I do take to heart everything that you've said, and I would offer my advice back to you that I think you are seeing this for what it is. And I do think that there is a lot of meanness and malicious activity there. And I am very concerned about it. I'd like to ask probably the gentlewoman, Mrs. Barton, and the gentlewoman from Cochise County, if someone, and Jim also, because your officials that handle this where you're paid professionals, if someone came to you with credible evidence, questions, but credible evidence, and they presented themselves in a professional way, would you sit down with them to discuss their problems or their issues?
Thank you, Chairwoman and Representative. Tina Barton speaking. As an election official, if I had a member of my community who had any questions about the process, I had those who came in after the 2020 election with questions. I was always willing to sit down and discuss what their concerns are, hear them out, also to let them hear from the election official the other side of the story. Sometimes what appears to be something that is nefarious or something along those lines could be something that is actually a lack of understanding about the process. So using those opportunities to educate, but also recognizing that every election has a time period after with a canvass and a certification period, that during that canvass period, if there are irregularities, we do have opportunity to correct those and to fix those issues at that time, as well as the laws, provide opportunity for any candidates who feel that the count may not be accurate or they don't trust what happened, that they could request a recount. And we would recommend then that would be the path that they would take if they don't believe the results. And the law does allow time for hand recounts to be done. I was part of the 2016 hand recount when Jill Stein did that in the state of Michigan. So it is something certainly that we could have done in 2020 in the state of Michigan if it had been requested. So I do feel there are avenues for us to address those sorts of things. Thank you, sir.
The gentlewoman from Cochise County.
Madam Chairwoman, Congressman, thank you for that question. In Arizona, elections are split between different divisions. So the Board of Supervisors, who I work for, handles elections, election day, poll workers. Our county recorder, who is an elected position in Arizona, handles voter registration. So they're by design two separate areas that work very closely together. So we do spend an enormous amount of time discussing things with voters, answering questions, and certainly things are investigated. We have a very active sheriff's office here. And if those complaints rise to that level, they get put to that office and to our county attorney's office, and those things are investigated. Like Ms. Barton said, we do have lots of layers here and opportunities and checks and balances and audits. So yes, we do spend an enormous amount of time investigating things that people think
If
are
someone
not
who is credible brought information to you and you did not respond back at all to credible requests, what conclusion do you think would be drawn by the person asking the question under legal status?
I think many people feel they're ignored, and I think it's an education opportunity. I think we need to make sure that people have an awareness of where to find statutes and laws and procedures so that they don't feel ignored.
Well, that's not my point. I'm talking about Ms. Barton and you, Ms. Marra, have said that you would make yourself available to a credible person, that you would attempt to understand what they were saying and rectify the circumstance by meeting with them. Is that correct?
The gentlewoman lady may reply, but the gentleman's time has expired. Okay.
Ms. Marra, you would meet with someone.
We meet with people all the time. That is correct, Congressman.
Credible people. Thank you very much. I want to thank each of you for this, and each of you will be receiving a letter from me that I would like for you to take just as seriously as I take you today. And thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this hearing. Ms. Marra, do you find that there's a difference between credible individuals and kooks?
Madam Chair, Representative, thank you for the question. I'm not sure that I distinguish between that. Human nature is human nature. People are people. And so we deal with everyone of all walks. So I can't really define what a difference would be.
I understand that you try to treat credible individuals along with kooks with equal humanity and equal compassion and equal service as a public official. I understand that, but I guess my question is, you know the difference between a kook and a credible individual, and when it comes time to spending your time in a meeting, you would choose to spend it with a credible individual, truly credible, than or as opposed to spending your time entertaining a kook. Isn't that correct?
You are correct, Representative, that
And-
our
and-
time
and
is
let me
very
ask-
limited.
And let me ask you this, you've seen a lot of kooks as a result of the perpetuation of the big lie, have you not?
We've seen a lot of interesting characters, Representative. That's how I would characterize them.
And it's made it more difficult for you to do your job, is that true?
It is difficult to do our jobs when we have to spend so much time debunking information and answering routine questions and getting bombarded with phone calls. That is definitely a challenge for us.
And then sometimes kookery can travel into threatening behavior. Have you been subjected to threats and intimidation from kooks or credible individuals, for that matter, as you have tried to do your job?
Representative, yes, I believe that we've had challenges from many different people from all walks of life here, and it is very difficult to continue to do the jobs with the phone calls and the threatening comments. Yes.
Yeah, Ms. Barton, you've overseen elections since 2013, and you were one of those Republican election officials who were strong enough to resist pressure from ex-President Trump to overturn the election results. Had you ever experienced anything like this in any of the prior election cycles to the 2020 presidential campaign?
I think we have to recognize that it's been, building for a few years now, even beyond prior to 2020, where we were seeing doubt being cast in our election results and people having concern over the election results. So the doubt and the concern and even the questioning of credibility, I think had been around for a few years. I actually went back to a speech that I gave in January of 2019. And I specifically started it out as a conversation talking about how doubt had permeated our elections. So while that had existed prior to 2020, what I would say had changed into 2020 is the amount of threatening behavior that we experienced in that election cycle. In my 32 years of government, where I had been an ordinance officer and an assessor, which are not popular positions in government, I had never had anyone ever threaten my life. And so, yes, I would say that the emotion and the threats have escalated to a degree where I have never experienced before.
Thank you, and I yield back, Madam Chair.
Gentleman yields back. Government agencies responsible for protecting our elections have confirmed there was no evidence of widespread fraud in the 2020 election that would have changed the outcome of the election. Former President Trump's own Attorney General, Bill Barr, confirmed this. So did the first director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, who was also appointed by President Trump. Secretary Condos, in your opinion, why do the lies around election fraud in 2020 persist, despite all of the facts that we are hearing on the ground and hearing today?
Frankly, thank you, Chairwoman. And frankly, I would just say that what I'm seeing is that people don't want to hear the facts. They're ignoring the facts that from our standpoint as election administrators, someone will say, well, this was fraudulent. And I have to try to prove a negative. How do you prove a negative? It just doesn't work. And I think, we've gone to the point where we developed a facts versus myths page for our website as Ms. Marra had said. We have checks and balances, we have recounts, we have audits, we have the proof that nothing has gone wrong, yet we are still, and to put it bluntly, Vermont is a blue state with a Republican governor, and we still have people who will say to us that we stole the election. And it just, I just don't know how to argue against that, except to say, we have the audit, we have recounts, we have the numbers that have been verified. And in Vermont, we canvass our election results 7 days after the election, and with members of the major parties that have to sign off. And we have not ever had a problem, yet we still have to try to defend ourselves. And we spend a lot of time doing that, whether it's a conservative blog that is writing stuff or actually continues to link to stuff on their page, basically telling us that we can't, that we have no proof that we were right. And they're saying that they are. I mean, I just don't know how we get around that. We've taken to education. We hold media advisories before the election to explain what to expect on election night. We will reach out to anybody that wants to talk to us to try to defend ourselves.
Thank you. We've seen how disinformation campaigns can erode trust in the reliability of our elections and endanger the lives of election officials and their staff. We've heard that today. These lies include the big lie that Donald Trump won in 2020, are amplified through television and radio personalities, newspapers, and social media. Ms. Benavidez, how has social media shaped the spread of disinformation, and have social media companies done enough to prevent it?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Well, social media companies know that we engage with disinformation, that there are so many psychological, emotional, human nature aspects that are driving us to seek this out. They know this about us, and they are driving eyeballs to that content because it makes them money. So it means that their business models, their algorithms are actually pushing incendiary content, including misleading posts that we may otherwise not engage with. A lot of the disinformation campaigns are specifically targeting communities of color. We know that social media companies have actually facilitated, profited from, and even participated then in these activities. I'll give you just a few key examples. On Facebook, for example, Meta has recently settled a lawsuit with the Department of Justice regarding its housing advertising scheme, admitting in the settlement that it engaged in discriminatory practices, that its algorithms targeted users based on location and other identity markers that could be proxies for protected classes. Ultimately, that meant that Black users saw less ads for affected housing. Then there have been asymmetries in language moderation and non-English content, both about the election and bogus voter fraud claims, have been less moderated in non-English languages, including Spanish and other languages. In Arizona, we know that Latinos and Native American communities faced a cascade of untrue digital messaging over Twitter about the voting process in 2020. In Wisconsin, we also know that communities of color from Madison to Milwaukee were targeted with lies about mail-in ballot fraud and ballot dumping. These examples go on and on. They touch on, of course, the electoral process, as well as narratives related to COVID, the census, and otherwise, ultimately pointing to the need that for some action to be taken to rein in these abusive practices by social media companies.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for this very timely hearing as we head into another election. Ms. Barton, during the 2020 election, you had to respond to national figures spreading lies about your office's work because of a simple and quickly corrected mistake, and I think you testified to that. What steps can we take now to protect election officials from that kind of misinformation? What messaging and approaches have you found that work to pre-bunk, not just debunk these allegations?
Thank you, Chairwoman and Representative, for that question. So one of the things that we have experienced when I was at the EAC as a senior program advisor, we did have a survey that we took of our local leadership council. The number one response that came back from our election officials across the country, there are representatives from every state on that council, said that they desperately needed help with communications. As already been indicated, we are working against forces that are able to spread information at a very vast pace and can isolate that information into their own silos, if you will, of sharing that type of information. We need respected leaders like all of you that are elected and can be powerful voices, of influential voices, to speak truth, to point voters to trusted sources of information, their local election officials, the EAC, to be able to point to those types of groups and point them directly to where truth lies. You all have very powerful influence over your constituency, and we ask that you use that power to do that, to help build trust in our democracy, that you're sharing information that is positive and that you're directing that information and having conversation with your local election official and how you can amplify truth to our voters.
Mr. Condos, because I'm interested in remedies, I was interested to learn, Mr. Condos, that your office created something called Facts Matter, a website, to counter misinformation and disinformation during elections. What has the response been so far, and what additional steps could help improve its effectiveness?
Thank you, Congresswoman. That's a tough one to answer. We set that up several months back. We publicized it. At the present time, I don't have any accurate numbers that I could even venture to mention how many times people have looked at it. But we have had a few, even though we have that up, we've had a few people attack it saying that we're spreading the misinformation at this point in time. So it really is, it's difficult. It's just one more piece of the education process that we've put in place. I know several of my colleagues across the country have done something similar. And I think it's just the little pieces that we have to do. And I think Ms. Barton said it the best. We need help with communications. Yes, we have our own communications people, but we need help at the federal level to help us with this, because if you post something on Facebook or Twitter, it can be spread in a matter of minutes to millions of people. And to try to defend that after it goes out is very, very difficult and almost impossible. So I guess I don't have a great answer for you, but I will say that we're just doing our part and just keep picking away at how we can do things, how we can communicate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, is now recognized for 3 minutes. Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, gentlemen from Texas, Mr. Sessions as well, for holding this hearing. As the chairman of the National Security Subcommittee on this committee, I can attest that we've received escalating warnings from our intelligence community, warning us of the emerging use of deep fakes in an effort to compromise elections and to launch disinformation campaigns in the midst of those elections. These digital photos and audio and video forgeries are generated using artificial intelligence. They appear extremely realistic. They're intended to manipulate or deceive their audience, and the technology used to create and deploy them is becoming ever more readily available, and it is low cost, easy to use, and rapidly evolving, getting better in a sense. So during our previous hearings to examine election security, our government and private sector panelists testified about the capacity of these deep fakes and deepfake technology to weaponize false information on a very massive scale. The RAND Corporation again underscored this danger in a report on deepfakes released just last month. And according to the report, the potential for havoc is yet to be realized. So, Ms. Benavidez, I know that you have a wider purview in terms of these elections. What can we do? I mean, we had 61 judges, I think, across the country, many of them Republican appointees, some of them appointed by President Trump, who dismissed the challenges to many of these election results based on lack of evidence. So there was not even evidence to support the protests of the election outcomes. And yet now we have deep fakes and the possibility of that technology really playing havoc, I think, with those who would be led astray by this false information. Any sense of what we might do to respond to that and how prevalent that is becoming?
Thank you, Representative. Given that tools for detecting deepfakes are not yet widely available, nor in many instances very reliable, I have to say that I'm uncertain of the efficacy of certain solutions that could blunt the spread of deepfakes. There's also a definitional question here. When we talk about deepfakes, what does that mean? It is such a broad term. It covers a wide array of ways that I think artificial intelligence can be used to change, manipulate, or create events, as you have alluded to. It can also create people realistically doing or saying things they never did. There's really a much bigger question here if we're only looking at the issue of deepfakes. And in terms of solutions, we have seen some state efforts like California take on legislation that would limit the spread and otherwise try to rein in their harm when it comes to deepfakes. This kind of area is not in my wheelhouse typically. I really met experts from organizations who have been deeply involved in this field, like Witness. There is, however, the broader question of what do we do in the absence of evidence that supports claims that are false? This is the bigger question that I believe we are here to answer, that we must answer. And that involves an interdisciplinary set of solutions that are both at the individual level to make sure that you, me, all of us here are better equipped to identify what is false, and that the systems in place that are perpetuating and even compelling us to see false information from our traditional to our social media ecosystems are less able to do so, that it is not profitable to do that. And so there is really a wide array of things here to consider beyond just deepfakes. Thank you for the question.
No, thank you. Madam Chair, my time has expired and I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Sarbanes, is recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Sarbanes.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chairwoman, and thank you for pulling the roundtable together. And I want to appreciate the testimony we have from the witnesses today who are participating. Very compelling and troubling at the same time. First of all, Mr. Condos, let me assure you that you're not the only person on this roundtable today who's proud of his Greek American heritage. You and I share that, and it's good to have you with us. Can you speak briefly to what kind of a resource drain it presents to you to have to be constantly responding to misinformation? I don't know if you can quantify that, but I'm sure you sort of start election season with an idea of what your staff is going to be able to do, how much time is going to be allocated to mail-in ballots to registration activities to the counting of the votes as they're coming in, et cetera. And then you get pulled away into just responding continuously to disinformation. Just describe how that upends the kind of resource allocation that you need to have in place to run these elections effectively. I think you're muted.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question, Representative Sarbanes. And I met your father at the White House at the Greek American Independence Day one year. So it was a great event under President Obama. Let me just say that first, my elections division here at the state of Vermont consists of 5 people. That's what we have. We have 246 town clerks that are out there that actually manage the election at the local level, but we don't have county government, but we have 5 people and we do everything in the elections world here. So it is a drain on us. Just the security that we've had to put in place. I mean, cybersecurity today, I'm always saying cybersecurity is a race without a finish line. We've got to stay ahead of it or try to stay ahead of it. And we've spent, I don't know how much since 2016. We actually started earlier around 2012 and 13 to look at the cybersecurity for our system. So we've been looking at cybersecurity. Now we're looking at physical security. We're spending in excess of probably $25,000 to $30,000 just to secure our building. This building that we're in, our administration building, is only houses about 20 people, but we're spending about $30,000 to secure this building better. We used to have the door open to the public. It is now locked, and we have cameras. We put additional plexiglass and whatever around any windows that are on the ground floor. These are the things that we're doing. We have cameras within the building now that we never had before. And this is all because of these threats that have come down. We've worked, excuse me, we've worked with DHS, with FBI, with the Department of Justice, with the Vermont State Police, the state's attorneys, the AG, local law enforcement. Since President Biden became president and Merrick Garland, the AG, and they started the Election Threat Task Force, that has been a help for us, but it's still, it doesn't complete the circle. It just helps with little bits at a time. So I don't have any quantification right now of those numbers, but I can tell you that myself here in Vermont, but across the country, our states are really hurting overall, and local officials. We have we've had several of my colleagues have had to go to 24/7 security. I mean, it is not a good situation.
Thank you. Madam Chair, do I have time to ask the other a question of Ms. Barton and Ms. Marra?
Yes, I appreciate you being on today. Thank you. Yes, you do.
This goes to and I think Ms. Barton, you said we need your help. And I would view that meaning the help of any person in the country who wants to see, elections carried out with integrity. But if you and Ms. Marra could speak briefly to how important is it that when an attack on the integrity of the election system is coming from one particular party, that elected officials in that party be the ones to step up and say, this is not accurate, this is misinformation. Now, Ms. Barton, you pointed out that the initial attack that led to all the threats on you actually came from some extension of the organized Republican Party there. I don't know, were there other Republicans, though, that did step up in the elected official space and try to address this information? Could there have been more? And whether it's whether the attack on the integrity of this system is coming from the Democratic side or Republican side, how important is it that officials in those parties who are in elected positions of leadership be the ones to say, this is not accurate information? If the two of you could speak to that, that would be great.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, Representative. That's exactly why I'm here today, because I am a Republican and I do feel a moral obligation to speak up and defend the election that I oversaw in 2020, even though it was an election that I lost. And I lost that on that ballot. And so I still felt the need to defend that. I think whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, I think that we all have a moral obligation, and we all have to look at the integrity of the situation and put the needs and the responsibilities and the laws of our country beyond our own personal political opinions. And we can't become a country that we only believe things when it agrees with our personal perception. We have to look at the facts. We have to look at the laws. If we are truly, as a Republican, part of the, party, the rule of law party, then we have to respect those that are in place and the processes that are in place to support those. And I felt the need to speak up at that time and defend the election that I oversaw as a Republican. And I would have done the same if I had been identified as a Democrat, because at the end of the day, I'm actually an election official that represents the constituents of my community, and my party vote has no bearing on that whatsoever.
Thank you. Very powerful perspective to bring. Ms. Marra, quickly, your thoughts.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative, thank you. I agree with Ms. Barton. It is really important that prominent political leaders set the tone in determining levels of voter confidence. Voters are not all experts in elections. There are many moving parts to elections. I am not an elected official. I'm an appointed official. So like Ms. Barton, we all have a political party, but we treat everyone the same. For us, it's a matter of the bottom line, and we need to defend elections. We need to defend the people that are conducting elections. And that goes from not only a federal level, but people in our state, local county leaders, cities and towns, mayors and councils. Many of those are nonpartisan races, but we've got to look to some bipartisan agreement among political leaders to rebuild trust in elections.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Madam Chair.
The gentleman yields back, and I want to thank all of our participants, because our election workers routinely go above and beyond the call of duty, as we've heard from all of you. They are our neighbors working to give back to our communities, and they are patriots. But we should not be asking them to shoulder these responsibilities alone. And clearly we need a national response. I'd like to ask Ms. Barton, 2020 election disinformation snowballed from lies on social media to a violent coup attempt at the Capitol. Is there now a federal strategy to counter election disinformation?
I thank you, Chairwoman, and I think that Ms. Marra actually just alluded to that in her answer. One of the things I've always loved about being an election official is that you administer a process that is overseen by an equal number of Democrats and Republicans on your teams. We do nothing in elections that doesn't have one member that's a Democrat and one member that's a Republican looking over our seals, our security processes, signing off on documents. It's incredibly important that partisan balance be maintained in everything that we do and for chain of custody. I think that the answer lies there in exactly what Ms. Marra just said, that we need combined and collaborative efforts from members in this country that are Republicans and Democrats, that are elected officials who have the power, who have the voice, and who have the influence to work together to promote this message of unity, this message of integrity and election security, working together. And that is where the answer lies. We have to come together on this issue.
Can I ask one more question? What more could the Election Assistance Commission be doing to ensure Americans have accurate information about elections?
Well, thank you, Chairwoman. I can tell you from working at the EAC They can't do more unless you fund them more. They are a small agency and they are asked to do a lot of things with a little bit of money. And I have been a part of those budget conversations, so I can say that truthfully. If you want the EAC to be a more powerful voice and to be a greater source of truth and information for members of this country, then we need to fund them so that they can be an agency that's greater than 50 people.
Well, thank you, Lou. Clearly, we need stronger federal support for state and local efforts to combat dangerous disinformation. Our democracy is on life support, and election workers are in danger for simply doing their jobs, as we heard from all of you today. I would now like to ask the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, if he would like to have a round of questions. Go to closing. Mr. Sessions.
Chairwoman, thank you very much. Yes, I would like to ask several questions. Have any of you seen the information that was presented in 2,000 Mules? Let the record reflect evidence.
I can start. I
wasn't sure who you were starting with.
Well, I just have any of you. Ms. Barton?
No, sir, I have not watched that movie. I have left my facts to the facts and the way it's played out in the court system.
Okay, Mr. Condos?
I have not viewed it, but I can tell you that Mr. D'Souza, who produced that video, is a partisan supporter. Who has violated federal campaign laws and was later pardoned. So I'm not sure what his motive if it can be trusted. And I have read many articles in reputable news articles that have debunked that film as not being credible.
Thank you. Ms. Benavidez?
I have not seen it. I hope we can focus on getting Americans facts about the electoral process. The people behind that movie have a history of distorting facts.
Ms. Marra?
I have seen parts of it. I have not watched the whole thing. I spend an enormous amount of time researching from various sources, all the sources and all the information, and then comparing them to laws in Arizona and federal laws, and then making my own conclusions based on the actual laws in place.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I would encourage each of you to please do that. They used actual video from the Secretary of State. And that video then was taken down at the time they came and did that, so that, but I'm sure that it's still available. The reason why I say this is even today's hearing is rather interesting, because on January the 6th, as you might be aware, there were only two states that were brought up before the Congress. That would not have been enough votes to overturn the election. There were substantial questions that were being raised by the legislatures of both those states that were asking for the opportunity, after they had reported their results, after canvassing, that later information came about. And at no point was it even discussed, quote, overturning the election on the floor of the House of Representatives. Third, it's important for us to note that it is true that all these judges did turn down the effort that was made on behalf of President Trump. It's important to note that in every one of those cases, it was filed under criminal charges, as opposed to it should have been a civil case. A civil case would have allowed the presentation of facts. And so I think the frailty was on the side of the lawyers who filed that. It in no way would it mean that there was not evidence. It would mean that the evidence, because it came from a non-law enforcement source, it would be difficult for them to accept. So I think it's important that we recognize that in a number of states around the country, including my home state of Texas, that governors made changes that were around state law, did not conform to state law. At least in Pennsylvania, the governor assembled a group of people who came up with ideas, and then the governor signed that as a decree. It was against the law. In the last year, there have been a number of state legislators who moved legislation that they were roundly criticized for, where they simply reinforced that state law could not be moved around, that it couldn't, you had to follow the law. And there was a vigorous fight all over this country, in Georgia and in Texas and in other areas, Pennsylvania, where they simply reaffirmed present law and said, and you cannot do things that would be extraneous to that law. So I think that this has taken a life of its own. I respect each one of you and believe that each one of you does have not just a story to tell, but a true story to tell. And I would like to see us in this committee get closer to where we actually brought information that would have to be vetted publicly, where the Federal Bureau of Investigation, where the federal components would actually go and look at this information and render an opinion about that. So that's why I've asked each one of you, I've just signed the letters right here in front of you. I've had several news organizations ask for a copy of the letter, and I will provide that to them. And I would like to ask that if each one of you would take the time, I will personally work with you, and I would like your opinion. But I am not a nut. I am not placing demands on you, but I am asking as a credible reference that I consider each one of you, please try your best to understand that when you have 57,000 votes that arbitrarily disappear, and the county administrators and county judges will not respond back to you, it does draw some frustration. So these are valid points that we would make on our side. Madam Chairman, thank you very much to you, the committee, and to each of our witnesses. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and I would like to respond to the conspiracy theory in 2,000 Mules that has already been debunked several times. My Republican colleague mentioned the film 2,000 Mules, so let's talk about that briefly. The movie was made by a conspiracy theorist. It claims to have used location tracking data to track movements of people around the 2020 election, and that this data shows thousands of people passing by ballot drop boxes. From there, it made the leap that these people are actually illegally stuffing ballot boxes with stacks of completed ballots. Former President Trump's Attorney General, Bill Barr, investigated these allegations and determined that the claims made in the movie were, quote, singularly unimpressive, end quote. The truth is 2,000 Mules is just the big lie on the big screen. And with that, I'd like to go to closing comments. And first, I'd like to see, before I close, I'd like to offer my colleague, Mr. Sessions, the opportunity to offer closing comments.
Madam Chairman, thank you to you, this committee, and each of the people who were here today. It is my hope that we will continue this conversation. It is my hope that we will be able to bring realistic data and information that has been unanswered. I believe the people in the state of Georgia need to actually respond back, whether that was actual data or not. I believe that the people in Georgia, in Arizona, in Texas, and Pennsylvania need an opportunity to hear firsthand of the questions that still abound. They still abound. And I don't know how someone could see 2,000 Mules and not see a huge amount of questions that need to be answered, and simply to toss it aside and say, well, it's a conspiracy theorist. That is not good enough. The use of their video is what was done. And if it's properly accomplished, then showing the metadata that was available and letting a realistic person who's an expert debunk that, I'm all for that. But I'm not for us just outright dismissing this. So I look forward to more information, another opportunity to be with you. And Madam Chairman, I want to thank you very much for bringing this hearing before us today.
Thank you. Our democracy survives only if people are willing to stand up to defend it. We must combat the spread of lies about voting and protect the people who administer our elections. The time to act is now. I want to thank everyone for their participation, and this roundtable is adjourned.